And now, the survival show that once survived Russia-mania 2017. Special edition shirtless Putin riding a horse kung fu grip action figure sold separately. In this episode, James Price drops by the studio to whip us into shape for the new year. We discuss what the habits that the best shooters and professional chefs both share. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 239. I'm your host Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. James, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Hey, Aaron, how you doing? First time I've ever been in the casa recording one live right in front of you, so I don't have the weird telephone voice that no one can understand.
I know. Well, this one's fun because even you've been over to the house and we've had dinner and stuff here, but you've never been in the rabbit hole proper, the man cave that it is.
Yes,
although my wife calls it the utility room, and I'm like, no, it's the studio.
It's a studio.
It's the studio. Stop calling my studio utility room.
It's a very nice setup here.
Thanks.
Very cool. I'm glad to be able to be here and do one in person, like I said, so I don't have that weird telephone voice anymore, so people can hear what I actually sound like.
There you
instead
go.
Of the my name is
Well, and I think this is cool because you've been working so much over the last year with processes and procedures and things like that. What was interesting to me when we first started talking about this topic was how you boiled it down and how you're comparing it or creating an analog for people in a way that really makes sense. And as far as what do great chefs and professional gunslingers have in common? Which
is a lot more than people would ever imagine. It's kind of a funny thing. I just ran into it over the years. As a kid, when I was growing up, my dad used to take me up to D.C. And that was, some kids do a thing where like they go to the ball game with their dad or they do some other activity. My dad used to take me to cooking classes in D.C.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that was like our thing. He'd take me to cooking classes. So I learned like sauces and baking, all these things as a young man. And then when I was a little older, he took me to France on a tour, like a culinary tour. So my whole life, I've really been into cooking and the processes that chefs use. And then when I was in Iraq, I was mentored by several people with tons of experience. They were either special forces or contractors. And over the years, I started to see a correlation between professional chefs that went to like Culinary Institute of America, which is the Harvard of cooking schools, and ex-special forces guys who worked basically with very little, but had their processes in their minds to kind of set up a situation so that they would be very good at what they do.
Which to me made perfect sense because my brother was one of the youngest people ever to go to CIA.
Oh, wow.
So when you were telling me that, I was like, wow, that makes perfect sense because my whole life I've heard him talk about as a retired chef that he has a big problem with cooking shows and everything else now because he's like, no, kitchens run like military units. And I was like, oh, whatever, man. But, in hearing you talk about it, I was like, oh, wow, okay, that makes perfect sense why he always said it that way. And he wasn't just being a perceived dick at work.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that most people don't know is if you don't know what the Culinary Institute of America is, nicknamed CIA, is that it was originally a trade school to teach cooking to combat veterans after World War II.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and then since then, it was a trade school for combat vets, basically. And it's now, now it's the Harvard of cooking schools. But throughout the years, they very much aggressively sought out veterans, especially combat veterans, to go to the school because that's what it was originally built on. So now you have, at this time, it's almost 60 years, you have 12 generations of combat vets who've created the systems to perfecting those systems, to be able to be creative on top of that, but learn the basic parts of it. But it's basically cooking at a professional level and creative level like that is the pursuit of perfection. And the unique thing about the pursuit of perfection as a chef is it's a measurable perfection. You will get 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars Michelin rated. If anyone doesn't know that, it's a Michelin guide, which is the finest restaurants in the world. And it's not snobby. There's some people who are a Michelin rated restaurant and they make a dumpling, just one dumpling. That's all they serve in the restaurant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But that dumpling is perfect and it costs $3. So it's not a matter of price. It's not a matter of snobbery. It's simply, is this thing that you cook, is it perfect?
Mm.
And so it's a measurable level of perfection within something. And I believe, and I've run into guys in my industry who they used to call, like that guy's a Mozart with a sniper rifle, or, they dropped him behind, the whole thing, drop him behind enemy lines all line alone. And he comes back with like 80 ears and a necklace kind of thing. But or in my trade, which is PSD, protective service details, is they ran 400 missions and didn't pull the trigger once, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But in my trade, it's you failed if you did not follow your systems and did not predict things.
And you hear the same thing from former CIA guys and other spook agencies that if, it's not what you see in the movies. If somebody pulled a trigger, an operation went horribly, horribly wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Because what are you going to get in a shootout with people you're protecting and civilians? It's totally against the thing. There are direct action and it can go towards that too. But another thing about cooking is you can only achieve it, which this is where it correlates with tactical training or skills training in general, is you can only achieve this level of perfection or level of efficiency by practice. They will cook bread 100 times. A Japanese chef who's mentoring under a master sushi chef will cook rice for 6 years straight until they perfect that rice, and to prove to their master that, hey, I have the ability to perfect something, to make something perfect. So you start with perfection by practicing. And then it encourages, unlike a lot of other fields, it encourages innovation for you to do something new, to find a new way to do things. Whether it's, a lot of people have seen like sometimes the new is old and old is new, but you see guys, the original way of shooting handguns was holding it with your arm bent below your eye and then firing the pistol one-handed. That was the original form that the FBI taught people to shoot. And now we see people try to get into a good isosceles position with the shoulders up and a real steady platform. As things have gone within the tactical community, people have become innovative. How did they become innovative? They learned that horrible way of shooting, and they became very accurate with holding a gun. I don't even understand why they did underneath your eye line. It was supposed to be a form of point shooting, but the bent elbow part and then the bent wrist part I never really got. Yeah. But guys would get very accurate at that. But then they say, well, I don't know about that. Then the FBI changed to the isosceles, which is both hands on the gun, legs spread really wide. And now it's the way of shooting a handgun two-handed is more of the karate stance with standing up more straight than you used to. So, but the only way people get to that point is to master the old way by practice and practice and practice. And then once they reach that point, when they no longer have to think about shooting that way, as they shoot, they can use this cognitive creative ability to say, I think another way would be better as they do it.
So it's essentially perfect the basics, perfect the old way of doing it until it becomes your competence in it becomes unconscious. And I think we've all experienced that. It's something we become really good at, where you practice a skill long enough and become good enough at it that you don't have to think about it. I hate the label muscle memory because there's no memory in your muscle. Really what it is it's becoming,
makes me insane.
Yeah. Which is it's like, no, that's not.
There's
it's
no
just,
brain in your muscle.
Right. It's become, your competence has become unconscious. You're able to do things without actually having to stop and think about, now I'm pulling my pistol out of the holster. Now I'm presenting it in exactly this way. And now I'm putting exactly this much pressure from right and left arm as I push out into the target. And riding a bicycle is probably the easiest way for people to wrap your head around it, because you don't think about, like you did when you were a kid, trying to balance this much pressure on this pedal, this much pressure on this pedal. Don't grab this brake because you'll go flying over the handlebars. And you don't have to think. You think about what you want to do, and your body just makes it happen. Yeah,
I think one of the best comparisons, especially for kind of more of the modern times, is video games. So the first time you play a video game, you're like, okay, I hit Y to let go, and you are like, by the time you finish playing after a few hours, you are cooked. But then once you start to learn the game, like say Call of Duty, you're going through, and now it's like, okay, I know how to use all the buttons. I know what to do in this situation. I know. And now, so how do you do that? Practice. You practice. And then you get to the point where you're running across the map on Call of Duty, and you are not thinking about anything but, how do I work out the current situation I'm in? And that is the goal of all tactical training. And that's the goal of cooking. To be able to become a master chef, you master the basics, baking, the grill, the cold dishes, the desserts. Desserts is a very big one because it's easy to make mistakes. Bread is actually the most important one to learn. People I've mentored, I've made them, one of the things I make them do is make bread for me, because if you are off by 1 minute, it will fail. So it lets people know if you can follow processes. And the thing is, the process is very simple, whether or not you do it the exact same way that everyone else has done it before you, because that system works. But then once you master how to make the bread, then you can make something very wonderful, something very new. The same thing with playing a video game. Now I know how to run around this map. Now I'm looking around, I'm working out the problems. So that's the same thing with cooking, where you have mastered the basics to the point where they're no longer take up any of your cognitive thinking ability, your creative ability, so that when you're doing it, it's the same as driving a car or mashing some buttons or moving around on the screen. Now you're able to work out the situation. And that is the key difference between people who live in a gunfight and people who die in a gunfight. They are thinking while they are shooting their gun, while they're moving.
Can you say that one more time? Because that was actually extremely important, I think.
Why people survive gunfights, the people who become master gunfighters initially, while they're fighting, while they're pulling that trigger, they are not thinking about the gun. They're not thinking about the trigger. They're not thinking about the target. They are working out the situation using OODA loop or whatever form of problem solving as they are doing that, because that takes up none of their ability to think.
The gunfighting takes up none of their ability.
The gunfighting is no longer even a skill. It's a habit. It's a habit just as any other habit that you've learned in your life, the habit of bad habits and good habits. And so once you understand, there's no such thing as a skill. There are habits of a skill. And it's the same thing with cooking. There are habits within that skill. How do you whip an egg? How do you cut a piece of beef or fillet a fish? You learn these habits. There's a start, the process, and then the reward, which is completing it. And so that's all skills are. And that's the way chefs are taught, to learn the habits so that they can then choose when to use what habit during a time of stress, or when it's not a time of stress and they're simply practicing, to then work out a new creative way to do the same thing that's better, more innovative, and in the case of a chef, more delicious, or in the case of a gunfighter, kills people faster without you getting hurt.
Yeah. We'll be back after this quick break. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, access to monthly virtual and in-person meetups in some areas, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival all day long with like-minded people. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH. That's right, all the way back to the beginning, including one that was never aired. And those are just a few things you get with your membership when you sign up and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde by going to itrh.net. Again, that's itrh.net. You know, as a total side jaunt, what's funny is I just remembered To Catch a Thief. The entire crew in the restaurant that is part of the movie To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant and Grace Kelly.
Ooh,
everybody in there was the French Resistance. They were all in a military unit. I just remembered that super random bit of trivia.
Which is one of the other points of it. To become very good at these things, you must work as a team. Basically, you must learn how to work with other people. There are very few times where you're going to be alone, especially when you're learning a skill. You have to learn a skill from several masters. Some of them are false masters, but if you've mastered the basics of that skill, then as you train with someone new, you can pull out the things that are either relevant to yourself or are new and interesting and innovative. I've seen instructors that 99.9% of what they do is garbage, and then they have one piece. But because I'm not thinking about trying to do that skill, I can actually think while I'm listening to them and be able to say, hey, I can pull out this piece. That's a very good piece. Especially just like a chef, like there'll be a French chef, there'll be a Italian chef, there'll be a Spanish chef, there'll be all these different types of chefs that you can be. The basics remain the same, but then you take the pieces that you want to innovate on and and combined together for your unique situation, for your unique form of cooking or your unique form of fighting. So that's one of the reasons I've always had problems with people. If they learn a lot of these really, ex-Navy SEAL shooter kind of training, that's great if you're knocking down bin Laden's compound at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
Not necessarily if some guy comes up with you in a pistol in a parking lot or breaking in your house or one of the few other chances that you may end up having to defend yourself in the States. So by mastering the very basics of the skill, which are the most important parts, you can then pull what you need to under that situation of stress without having to be like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? It's like a good example of that is for especially the older guys out there, as you close your car door, you see your keys in there. Because that so rarely happens. You don't practice grabbing your door when you lock your keys in there. I actually did this experiment. That second when you see your keys are in your car and you're like, and you cannot move because you're trying to work out what should I do next. Yeah. And so I actually took myself out in the car and I practiced closing it and pointed out. I had a guy said, every time I do it, put the keys in there or don't put the keys in there. And as I close the door, I turn around and see it. And eventually I learned how to do that. Now, when I close, there's no way I ever close my keys in the door. So it's kind of like, that was kind of like, and that is one of the things, the same thing as chefs do. They learn a skill and they're like, hey, let me put this food in a plastic bag and cook it a slow time, which is a sous vide.
Sous vide, yeah.
And then fry it, or instead of just fry it, because now I've mastered the frying, let me think of a better way to do this. And so it's kind of they could get the experiment. I mean, the amount of food a master chef, a Michelin rated chef throws in a garbage can as they experiment is just a massive amount, which I wish I lived next to one because I'm sure it's still very delicious, but they are like, this tastes like what it was before. I drew my weapon the same way that I did before. There's no speed into it. So I'm going to throw it in the garbage can and start again. It also teaches you that if it doesn't work, throw it away. It's unimportant.
Yeah, that's a good. I remember growing up watching my brother. He would just cook and cook and cook and cook, and he would just cook the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And I'd be like, "What the hell's wrong with this? Like, what are you doing?" And it was always just like slight little changes here and there, trying things out.
Yeah, it's how are you going to learn how to draw a weapon better or fire a weapon while you're running at full speed? If you have to think about, I'm running at full speed, I'm firing my weapon while I'm moving, or how do I cook this fish? I got to remember to turn it when it gets a certain amount of crispiness until the point where you can do all of those things without thinking. Then as you do it, what am I doing wrong? How can I improve upon it? So it's literally, 12 generations of combat soldiers' experience put into a trade of cooking, which then translates exactly to training and operational skills. One of the first things I was taught in this trade was basically one of my oldest mentors. I won't say his name as he doesn't like me talking to me, saying his name public, but he said, don't throw all your shit in a pile, lay it out individually and do it exactly the same way everyone else laid out their gear. And it's a thing in cooking called mise en place, which I'm probably destroying it, the French pronunciation, but it basically means put everything in its place. Everything has a place. Why should everything have a place? Everything that you put in, you put your keys in the pocket the same way. When you lay out your gear, it's in the same way. When you train, it's in the same way. Everything's in the same way. Why? How much ability do you lose looking for something? Yeah. How much of that cognitive ability per day? And something I learned when I was out on the roads in Iraq back in the day was you have X amount of cognitive ability a day, the ability to form new thoughts, to be able to work situations out. Maybe 4 hours a day for most people. If they really get skilled, more likely it's an hour. So, and the only way to get that back is to get REM sleep. And when you're out on the road, or when the stuff hits the fan and situations are going bad, when there's a flood in Houston, like there was recently that we responded to, you may not sleep for 48, 72 hours. You may get a little bit of naps here and there. But if you're trying to save your house and pump out the water, and you got your kids there, and then you're also hearing all these things about like people are shooting at the aid workers trying to come and get you and help you. And then you're like, what do? I need to get a helicopter to my house, but my phone doesn't work. What other ways do I have to signal someone? And so, but if you spent the first 30 minutes looking for your flashlights, looking for your rain jacket, looking for these other things, you have burned up this very, very minute ability to work out problems. And so what mise en place is everything is in the same place every time you do it. And before you start, you put everything where you want it to start.
See, that makes perfect sense to me for a lot of reasons. First of all, in those situations, your cognitive abilities are diminished because of stress. And if everything's always in the same place and you've rehearsed things,
but
and
what causes stress? You do not know how to do something.
Yeah, part of that is not knowing how to do something or being unsure of the decisions you need to make, not having rehearsed it enough. And
practiced.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's hugely important. I think the other thing too is, and a lot of people don't take this into account when they're doing their planning and having their preps organized and stuff to take this back to prep or gun shooting or anything else, is anybody who's had a kid or anybody who's been around a kid who has a newborn and they're like, oh my God, they're exhausted. And you're like, how can you be so exhausted? Like, you had to have gotten some sleep. And they're like, yeah, but I kept getting woken up all the night. So having that interrupted sleep, just it's you might as well have almost had none. Yeah. So
if you do not get REM sleep, you do not recharge your brain. It's that simple. There's one condition, I forgot the name of it, where you don't get REM sleep. And those people, no matter how much food they eat, they end up going down to skin and bones and then dying within 18 months.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. They sleep, but they never hit REM sleep. And so that's the only way to get that back. But you're not going to be able to sleep during an emergency. You're not going to be able to, if you're a military person, a law enforcement person, or a firefighter listening to this, or any other emergency responder, during, as in times of emergencies, you're not going to be able to sleep. So there's no need to burn up any of that cognitive ability on remembering where your boots are because they're in the same place. Remembering where your keys are in your pocket. Every time you have to remember which pocket you put your key in, you burned up 30 seconds of that ability. And that's a minute ability. So I always put my keys in the same pocket. The other thing is, when you're working with other people, when it comes back into the group dynamic, everyone knows where everything is. Everyone's bag is packed exactly the same. I can reach in someone else's bag on a mission and know exactly where everything is. Yeah. So if I have to pull something out of someone's bag, I don't have to think. The goal is always, when it comes to skill, is to use no ability, none of that brain power, except to work out the current situation that is changing in front of you. And by using the same techniques the chef does to be able to practice, as they say, master the basics, and then have everything exactly the same way every time. You go to a chef and you blindfold him and he knows where he originally is, and you tell him to point out where the basil is. He will point exactly to where it is. You go to a Navy SEAL or Delta guy's team room where they have all their equipment. You say, I'll put a bag in front of him. I say, this is the medic bag. Grab me the number 7 suture. And he will reach in that bag and pull it right out immediately. So why is that a good skill? Because you're not thinking about where that suture is. You are working out the medical condition that you're treating. So it's the exact same skills when it comes together. And it creates also a level of efficiency. Time is always against you. You can never get time back, no matter how much money you have, no matter how smart you are, no matter how good a guy you are. You cannot get time back. You spend that few minutes looking for the spices in your kitchen. You cannot get that time out back because you have to open the kitchen at a certain time for the restaurant. When you're looking for your earmuffs, when you're going to the range, well, you just lost 2 minutes of time you could have spent on the range. It gains you time. Time is something that, especially as you get older, you realize it is extremely finite.
Somehow for me, it was like when I hit 40 a couple of years ago, all of a sudden, man, that clock starts ticking louder and louder and louder. And you're like, man, got to get things done. Got to get things done. No messing around.
I'm not going to live forever.
Right.
Or for my case, I was like, I made it to 40.
I had that too.
That was unexpected.
Yeah. Jonathan and I were actually, how the hell did we live through doing that? And I think that's a funny thing you don't get until it's right around 40. All of a sudden you're like, all right, that clock, it's ticking, and I can't get any of those seconds, minutes, hours back.
It's also the time when you look back and it's like, I wasted so much time. Yeah. Oh, you idiot. Your whole 20s is just a black hole of time.
Right.
But to touch back on the mise en place is also one of the rules it teaches you is clean as you work. This is something that I've done a lot of experimentation on as being a team leader or a senior team leader and as myself. And it's also something that the Marine Corps teaches in their combat hunter program. They roll up to an area, and if there is garbage on the ground, the chances they will be attacked increase by 100%, 200%, 300%, depending on how much garbage is on the ground.
How wild.
Because people get to a point where there's so much visually going on that they just give up or they're doing something else. And this is something taught in the PSD trade for a long time. If you look at areas of violence in the United States, the streets are dirtier. Yeah. And it's the same thing as in guys that you see whose hooches are a mess, where guys who, like every guy I know who trains that is really good, you go to everywhere in their house and it's pristine. It's because they have this system of not using their visual memory up. What happens with your visual memory is you can absorb X amount a day. Every time you look at something and it's different, your mind registers it. But if everything's the same, then it doesn't register it. That's why you see like guys that get up and they make their bed. So their bed's the same way every day and things like that. So in amount of chaos, and I've noticed it very much working in teams, back in the day, like when I was first starting, I never understood why we'd have to stop right in the middle of training or right in the middle of prepping to go out on a mission. And the senior team were like, hey, you guys, stop, clean up everything, clean this garbage off the floor, sweep this mess up, organize your equipment, empty out the garbage cans and air out the room a little. And I never understood that. But what it ended up being is that as you get sloppy, as the environment around you gets sloppy, everything else gets sloppier. And so it's kind of like your mind almost gives up. But I've noticed that in efficiency in business, in teams. The more garbage, the more a wreck everything is working in a group, the worse performance goes down. So that's one of the things that all these combat veterans that went to the Culinary Institute of America saw. A chef who does not clean as he works does not ever become a master. A lot of people think I've got OCD, so I need to have everything in one place. It's opposite. I have chaos. DC. It's like if you ever saw my rooms when I was in my 20s, it looked like Pigpen would be like, you need to clean up this place. It's ridiculous. What it does is it forces you to create a system of order with it so that you can concentrate on what you're doing. It's extremely important, especially in teams. If anyone works in teams, I would like to have them do a challenge, have a day where wrappers are on the floor, the garbage cans are full, guys didn't shower before they came to work, there's papers everywhere, and then measure the performance the next day where as everyone works, you straighten up everything and put everything in even piles. Or when you go to the range, you go, instead of like throwing out all your mags on the table and they're a mess and then boxes of empty ammunition on the ground, train that way one day. The next time you train, go out, lay every single thing so it doesn't touch each other, all facing the same direction. As you open up your ammo boxes, you throw them away in a garbage can as you do it. And I guarantee that your performance during that day of training will be substantially better than the time when you just left a pile of empty boxes on the floor and a pile of magazines sitting on the table.
That makes perfect sense to me. Years ago, I started and ran a pretty large e-commerce department, and things kept getting messier and messier. And I do have a bit of OCD, so it would drive me nuts. So one of the things I started doing was I went to both customer service and the shipping department individually and said, at the end of the day, your last 10 minutes of the day, every day, will be cleaning your station and cleaning the station around you. If you finish before the person next to you, help the person next to you. And that way, when we walked in the next day, I said, you will walk in the next day and you will have a clean station ready to get to work. And you will feel better about the space you're in. And I did see productivity go way up. And I saw people that weren't doing so well, and I was about ready to fire, start doing a whole lot better.
Yeah, it's also teaches you something that's very hard to learn is mindfulness, to pay attention to everything around you. But the funny thing about that is in a professional kitchen, it doesn't matter if you're the sous chef or one of the senior chefs. At the end of the day, everyone cleans the kitchen top to bottom until it's absolutely spotless. Because the next day they come in, they start on a clean slate. So that's something. And it's also something that teams do. One mentor I had, if he came in and you went out on a mission, your bed was messed up, your bed would be on the parking lot, flipped over. Yeah. I mean, he says, don't you ever come back from a mission into a messy bed. because you accomplish nothing that day. It's also a matter of routine and habit that you end everything correctly, which is another thing that chefs do. They always, even if they messed up the process, they will finish everything exactly the way they're supposed to. They will have a clean workspace. They will have a clean mind. They will put everything back where it should go, mise en place, exactly where it should be. The other thing about mise en place is, I harp on this a lot, but it is the thing that changed my life from a very chaotic person who kept messing things up to someone who's became very efficient. And then later, after learning these things and making everything a habit and no longer having to think, created some fairly good innovations within the industry, which one large military contractor uses a manual I wrote. The last thing is it creates a system that is the same every time. As we've talked about many times before, if it's the system that works and it's the same every time, then you can innovate off of that or simply not have to think during a time of stress. And so you can use your creative memory for something more important, which is instead of standing in one place, or like the first time I got into a shootout, a guy had to yank me behind a car because I froze. Scream at me, telling shoot back, because I had not practiced anything before. I did not know what to do. So I was trying to think of the 8,000 possible scenarios I could do next. And then what does that do? It is watching your car close with the keys inside.
Freeze up. And
yeah. And that's the reason why we used to think these guys were godlike. There's one time this guy got in a shootout. I was standing next to him and he yawned during a shootout.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and
I've heard of that. It's a lot of stuff like that.
I was like, bro, you bored? You need something? But what it was is he was doing nothing. He was literally driving to the grocery store, playing Call of Duty, or making a sandwich. He was doing absolutely nothing, but he was working out the situation. And that's why he was 58 years old and been pulling triggers since he was 17.
Wow.
And not a literal scratch on him. Yeah. So that's what you get from having these systems, from having mise en place, from having your practicing until you master something. The last major one I'll touch on, I have some small tips that come from this, but more like results. But the last big one is recipes. So what people don't realize what recipes are. So the recipes let's compare recipes with training. So recipes, it's a name. You need to know, I don't know how many times, I'm sure everyone's run into this a lot, and maybe some people more than the others, is when someone starts a conversation in the middle, it makes my brain hurt. It's like you need to first say the subject. What that is you look at this skill. I'm going to learn this skill. It's on a piece of paper or a video. Okay, that is my trigger, because that you need to have the trigger process and reward to create a habit. So the name. So this is a Chateaubriand that I'm cooking, or it is I'm learning how to draw Israeli style, which is a very unique skill. The amount of time it takes, if you look on every single recipe, it will take preparation time and cooking time, and then total time. As we mentioned before, time is the only thing you can't get back, and time will determine if you can do it. So if you can train during this, a lot of people are like, I'm at home, I don't know what I can train in, I don't know what to do. If you make a recipe out of your skill training, then you'll be able to look at each recipe and say, I can do this here, because the next thing is the ingredients and the amount of ingredients. So that would be salt, pepper, and blah, blah, blah. For training, it can be a SIRT gun, which is a little clicker gun, or it can be an airsoft BBs or actual bullets or whatever else you need to be able to train with. If you can't have your ingredients, you can't train with it there. And the other thing is then mise en place comes in again. You take your ingredients and you lay them out. Here, I'm starting this training with a clean mind, and I'm not going to have to think, okay, my magazines are here. Where's the 30 rounder? And, there's a pile of boxes on the ground that are half empty and all this other stuff. No, you don't do that. You have your ingredients, you have the amount, you put them down, and it's written down the exact amount every time. No energy used there. Then the equipment. The equipment you need? The equipment is the physical equipment. I need the pistol. And it's also the environment. I need to be at a range, or can I do this in my garage? Or can I do this while I watch TV? I have a whole thing of what I call buck slips, but no one ever uses that term anymore.
Yeah, even I earlier were like, what are you talking about?
It's index cards. And I have little training things on each of these index cards, and I put them in a little small bin with all the stuff I need to train with that. I have got a half a dozen of them by my TV, which I can do while I'm watching TV. So you can figure out what you can do in what environment and where you are, then you place it there. So it's the environment, the equipment you need, the environment you need if you have that. And then the ordered list of steps, which is like take Chateaubriand out, slice with 2 1/4 inch slices, place on the board, then now put in egg wash or identify threat, pull pistol from your holster for the Israeli, chamber the weapon, and then point at target. So these are the habits within the skill. So it's the exact same thing. You make 5 steps, no more than 5 steps of how to do that particular part of the skill, which is the habit. And once you master that, from that was I had to learn Israeli style, which a lot of people don't know this. Israeli style is chamber empty, mag in. It's because they used to have to carry without holsters. Or back in the day, it was kind of, if you dropped a 1911 or a Browning and it had a hot pipe, and hit the back, you were going to blow your leg off or something.
Right. I think I think there was one more piece that I heard that I thought was really interesting because that used to like boggle my mind. Like, why do they do it that way? I think one of the other rumors I heard was that they were getting guns from all over the place. And so you'd be getting a whatever. And so everybody's training had to be consistent enough, but the function of the gun wasn't consistent in its safety. And they were also training lowest common denominator. So it was back then.
Well, that was actually the exact reason why I taught myself the Israeli method of carrying.
Oh, okay.
Is because I'll go to a country and sometime I might get a Ruger P98 made in 1984, or I get a Glock Generation 3, or I get a Browning or a Tokarev with the weird magazine thing on the bottom. So I would train in a way that it's like, every safety is different. Every manipulation is different. But if you carry empty with the safety off and you chamber around and fire it, it is exactly the same with every single semi-automatic weapon. But it's a very weird skill to learn. So I made a recipe for myself. I had my the name, which is Israeli carry, the time it takes to practice. Maybe 5 seconds per draw. So I was like, well, I got 20 minutes free. I can get to that 10,000 repetitions in like 4 days. And so it also will teach you the amount of time approximately that it takes you to master that skill. The amount that I needed snap caps. So I was like, well, I need 50 snap caps to be able to do this. The equipment, I needed a pistol that was a semi-automatic pistol. The environment, I can't really do it in my front yard or my backyard because my neighbors would call the SWAT team on me. So it's like, where can I do it? Well, I got to be inside. And I also don't want other people in the house because just to be safe. And then the ordered list of steps, push the butt so that you can grab the handle, pull at the same, and then grab slide, rack slide, and fire as normal. So then so that was my recipe. At the end, also, the most important thing is knowing what the end result of perfection should be. So for a chef, it is a picture of this beautiful cake. For training and tactical skills, it's generally a video or several pictures of what each step should look like, and with no more than 5. If you look at most great recipes, there is no more than 5 steps in any of them.
Well, that's interesting.
Because you cannot remember more than 5 steps. If you have an IQ of up to IQ of about 98, which I think like 80 to 90, like 78 to 98 is about the average. You can remember 5 things. Anything above that, you got to get into the 130 range to remember 6 steps. And then to remember up to 10 steps, you got to be into 160s to 180s. And that's pushing it because like to remember 10 steps in a row like that is, even at that level under stress, is very difficult. But you can have 2 habits that each have 5 steps. So it's the ability to combine a lot of different steps. So you have to know what it should look like at the end. So a recipe is simply a training routine. A recipe, if done correctly every time, is a consistent result that is the same at the end, every single time. So if you want to learn a skill, look at a recipe and then put that skill into a recipe with 5 steps, all the parts, all the ingredients, the equipment, and with the ordered steps and knowing what the end result should look like. And you will be able to learn whatever skill you want to, whether it be tactical or anything else, very, very quickly. Don't do the draw. Like if you're first starting, it's like, okay, draw from concealed and then aim at a target and then reload. That's way too much. Master the draw, master the aimed or shot or the point shooting shot, and then master the reload. Each one of those is up to a 5-step process that you learn individually. You practice those only individually. So now you have 3 habits that you've learned. And then at the end, when you combine them together, it's one very smooth thing, so that now you have a 3-course meal based off of each of these 3 recipes you've learned. There's a few other things that end up actually become more of a result of training in your tactical skills or your fighting skills or your gunfighting skills, like a chef trains. You end up getting these results at the end that you didn't specifically train for, but it either creates an opportunity of, or you now simply possess. One of them, if you see in training and you'll see in like PSD teams or military teams, they'll be like, everyone move left. And you'll hear everyone repeat, moving left, moving left, moving left. They always repeat. It's called, in the military, it's called a back brief. Okay. It's like contact right. And you'll hear everyone go, contact right, contact right. Your ears and your brain work very weirdly during something that's going on. You'll see someone, usually your hearing's not so hot during stress, but you'll know that he heard something and they won't do it. Is because, just like, again, it comes into the habit. There's a switch, process, and then the reward. So the switch, it creates a thing in your mind where the switch is, I've just repeated what needs to be done. Then the process, let me get back in the car. The reward is, I'm in the car. You cannot build a habit without those 3 parts. And most people don't have the switch. And the military, whether on purpose or not, has realized we need a switch, and that switch is repeating the command. And if you see in a professional kitchen, they'll say 3 filet mignons, 1 rare, 1 medium, 1 well, and you'll hear the chef on the fry pan, 3 fillets, 1 medium, 1 rare, 1 well. Yes, chef. They'll acknowledge that from them. So it's the way that under stress and other things that they have gotten it right, and it's their switch. Now they know, okay, these are the things I need to do. I've just memorized 3 things. If you have seen a professional kitchen, they are cooking. Sometimes they're cooking multiple things at the same time. Yeah, but they're only doing it at one time. It sounds like you're contradicting yourself, but you may be cooking a steak, a piece of salmon, and frying a gourmet burger or something. But you'll see that they don't have the burger pan in one hand and the steak pan in the other. They will go from station to station doing it one thing at a time. So it teaches, but the back brief teaches you to be able to do multiple things, which is draw your weapon, aim, fire, and then reload. It teaches you that process. You can do it for a lot of different things, but obviously when you're at work or something, you can't be like, Roger that, sir, put the TPS reports in the red box. But if you do it in your head, you'll create a habit from it where you don't have to burn up any of your brain power. So the back brief is something that all professional chefs' kitchens use, and all professional small operations, military forces, up to the larger ranger units, they all do the same thing. And the bigger units, they don't do it. So it's very unique within the learning community of elite groups, is that they repeat what they're told to do. Another one is like, I mentioned it for a second, the Yes Chef. It teaches titles and respect, and that someone is better than you. If you're learning from someone who has mastered their skill, whether he's a 3-star Michelin chef or a combat veteran or someone who's studied psychology, to someone who can pick locks, other simple way to say it is an open mind. Right. If you don't go in there with an open mind saying this person is an expert and they're better than I am, then you cannot learn anything. You must have this open mind. And so within the professional cooking community, the elites, it's always yes, chef, no chef. And then you see in the military, Roger that sergeant, Roger that LT, Roger that team leader. They do the same thing. They establish that this person is a person of superior experience, superior skill, and is someone that you need to pay attention to, because the worst thing that can happen in combat is say, are you sure?
Yeah, that's valuable time that just got wasted.
Yeah, and it happens. And it's the same thing in training. If you're like, are you sure? It's like, no. It may or may not be good, but you know what? If you mastered the basics, all of your basic cooking skills or all of your basic tactical or shooting or gunfighting skills, then now you're not using that ability. So you're thinking and you're like, well, this is garbage, or this is simply something I will never use. Do it anyway and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of saying, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or like, first of all, why are you paying for a class and using your time with someone who you don't believe in as an expert? We've touched on this on previous ones.
Right.
Don't go to the $99 trainer. You need to go to the $500 trainer, you know, because if their time is worth something. So if you're spending $600 for a weekend on a training class, then I'm guessing that you think this person is enough of an expert. Go in there. He is superior. Call him sir or ma'am the whole time. Don't go, all right, Travis, or something like that. You're like, yes, sir. No, sir, because you are the student. You are there to learn. He is better than you, and you must get that in your head. This person is better than I am. Put that ego away. Men especially, but just in general, you cannot learn if you have an ego. You must have zero ego to be able to learn.
And that's one of the things you and I were talking about before we started recording, just like how that has become destroyed. Like, and you can see it in the culture with just waiters who come to a table, and rather than going around the table to set things in front of people, they'll just freaking reach over people. Or if you're in a restaurant and you're headed to the restroom and the waiter's coming at you, they just keep coming at you.
Yeah, you got to get out
Whereas
of their way.
they used to get out of the way, and they would, if you go into the really nice restaurants, they still teach that. The waiters will all, even with a full tray, stand to the side and let the customer pass by.
Yeah, I was
because
going to
it's
say
like,
the same thing. You go to a Michelin rated restaurant, you will never see that.
Yeah,
or you just go to a very good restaurant, you will never see that. Because that's the other part of the reaching a level of perfection. You can be the best chef in the world. You can have the best sous chef. You can have all the best chefs in your kitchen. If the waiter is rude, you will not get that Michelin star.
Right.
Period. So that's the unique thing, is that everyone must be very good, and it's your responsibility. Everything is your fault. I think his name is Thomas Keller. I spoke to him before, and then there's a few other chefs, but they've always said everything is your fault. Everything that happens in the kitchen, if one of the waiters drops a spoon on the floor, it is your fault. Figure out how that is your fault, and then it will not happen again. The second you blame someone else, you can't fix it. Then you can't fix it, and you lose.
Yeah.
So everything is your fault. That's one of another big things in my life that I learned that definitely changed my life. The other one we've spoken about many times already, but I want to talk about it again, is innovation and experimentation. Once you use these same skills that a chef uses to improve whatever technical or tactical skill that you want, you then have the ability to use that time when you train to work out new systems, to improve. Maybe not for everyone, just to improve how it works for yourself. It's like for years, the last few years, it's like everyone's like, okay, you get into the kneeling position to shoot. And I always did it, and it felt like someone took a flamethrower to my knees and back every time I got up. And then once I got used to that and started mastering, because you don't really do a lot of kneeling and going prone when you're doing mobile work like I was. So it was a newer thing for me. Once I mastered that and did through repetition, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to kneel on both knees. And then get up like a normal person does. And so, but I would never have gone to that if I didn't, to the point where I didn't have to think about doing that skill. Yeah. So now then you can start experimenting, just like a chef, throwing all the stuff in this beautiful food in the garbage can, because it's not the thing that they were thinking. It's not the new innovative way. And so you can learn to innovate and be better at the skills, either for your own personal body physics and things like that, to teaching other people. So one of the things I noticed is that instructors who had no formal instruction always comes up with some very innovative things after they master the basics. So they'll either take a book, or they'll watch a video, or they'll learn these things and then get better, and then mostly mentor under someone, which goes back to the titles and respect. Right. They find someone, they say, oh, this guy's better than me. I'll wash his car, and then he'll teach me how to do this or that. It's being open-minded to that someone's better than you. So all these things combined, every single chef works in a kitchen. Now, unfortunately, in the chef industry, you have to work under some miserable bastard who's a 3-star chef who basically just abuses you for 8 years. Yeah. But every single master chef that has eventually reached a Michelin star rating after working under those miserable conditions, they said that he was a miserable bastard who made me a master.
Mm-hmm.
Through understanding that someone's better than you, whether or not you like that person, you're able to absorb those skills from them.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to be that mentor because I think it's counterproductive, but that's because I have somewhat the luxury of time. It's not like we got to put you through 9 months of SF training and then we're going to drop you in Afghanistan. So when that technique works very well, when you have to get someone to either train or quit, learn the skill or quit. But if it's a lifelong learning experiment, which is what you should be on to constantly improve your skills, then you need to have that open mind that let me find people who are better than me and then be able to experiment with the new knowledge that I'm learning. And then the last one is special positions. They call them chef de parties, which is another French word I just slaughtered. But it's basically a chef that has mastered the basic skills and now becomes very specialized in one. So they become very good at everything, but then they're going to pick one that they're going to be excellent at. And that's very important for any skill training. When you become very good at something, one thing, it increases your confidence and lets you know that you can be better at everything. The equivalent in this skill would be a medic or a sniper or an explosive expert or a lock picker or a computer hacker or any of these other things. It's like you cannot become great at one thing until you become very good at everything. Another lesson from the chef world. You cannot train to be a master baker, a master with the meats or with beautiful dumplings that cost $3 each and get you a Michelin 2-star rating. And that's the only thing you make. You cannot do any of those things until you've mastered the basics, because part of that dumpling is the dough, which is baking. It is knowing how to knead. It is understanding the time that it takes in order for it to come out perfect. It is the combination of the flavor profiles for the sauces, how to braise the meat properly so that it's done well. And once you've mastered all those, you will create your master skill at one thing, which is I've seen guys, like I said, yawn before in combat or medics that do things that are amazing, or the civilian who's taken the time to become very good at everything and then picked one thing to do, as we've seen in some of these recent mass shootings. Put a tourniquet on a lady and not break a sweat. Do it with, I saw a video of a guy doing that with, I think he did it actually with a belt. He did it like he was watching TV. And that is someone who as someone who's not in the trades, took him seriously and practice all of the basics. Everything is the basics, so that under that circumstance, he was able to, I don't have a tourniquet. His belt tourniquets are usually garbage, but if you know how to do them correctly under that circumstance, he was able to do all of the thinking right then, because the skill of making that tourniquet and applying it properly was not a skill. It was simply a habit, no different than going to the store in his car. So
exactly.
Yeah. So who would have known that the ironically named CIA has created systems that will help you train to be very, very good at what you do, so you can protect yourself, your family, your friends or simply be calm when your house is flooding and you have a 2-year-old baby in the house and a wife who's worried about taking care of your daughter, and the flood's coming in and there's no electricity and you are smooth as ice and you yawn and you take care of the situation. A chef can teach you how to do that. It's very cool interesting.
Shit. And I think this is great going into the new year for anybody looking to up their shooting skills or any of the other prepper skills that they're after.
Yeah.
Dude, James, as always, freaking phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing what is a really unique perspective that I think a lot of the people out there writing gun blogs and talking about guns and stuff either don't know or don't share.
Well, you can thank my dad. So thanks, Mr. James Sr.
Yes. And we got to see a more sophisticated side of James. Yes. And I think we know than the audience typically. I get to see it, and a few other people.
Sauced up this time. So.
Show notes, links to past episodes with James, and other resources can be found by going to intherrabbithole.com/E239. Support the show and get I2H Roving Horde Armada members-only benefits. Like what, you ask? Great question. Like twice monthly virtual hangs, access to the secret I2H Armada Facebook group, and the on-demand bug-out bag class. And that's just to name a few things you get when you go to i2h.net to become part of the Roving Horde Armada. Now, a bit more about the virtual hangs. Twice a month, members get on a private, secure video chat to talk about guns, current events, mead, food storage, James Price's mustache, or whatever blows their hair back and their skirt up. Go to i2h.net to read more. Again, that's i2h.net to find out about exclusive members-only benefits. With that, we wrap up episode number 239 and the first episode of 2018. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.